Ever get that feeling like online humor can just take this dark turn? You know, you share like a funny meme or just a lighthearted comment, and then suddenly you're in like this huge debate, and you see all these like unsettling beliefs just kind of lurking beneath the surface.
Totally.
So we're going to deep dive into that today, using an excerpt from this article by Daniel Boyd called When Jokes Turn Toxic.
Okay.
It's in a collection called Pasted Text.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, and the author shares this experience that like really made him stop and think. This like harmless skit on social media ends up with this comment section that's just full of people taking stereotypes as like facts.
Yeah, it's kind of wild how humor can be like weaponized, you know?
Yeah.
Almost like it gives people a free pass to just voice these prejudices they might normally keep hidden.
Right.
It's almost like the laughter masks the message, even if it's like rooted in these harmful stereotypes.
Yeah, and the author highlights this with an example from like his own experience.
Okay.
He saw this skit that's playing on that stereotype of women constantly needing like ego-boosting reassurance.
Oh, yeah.
So on the surface, it's all played for laughs, but the comment section was full of people taking it as like gospel truth.
Oh, wow.
About relationships.
And that's where it gets slippery, right? The humor might be innocent, but it's the interpretation. The way people latch onto these stereotypes and use them to validate their own biases.
Right.
Like that's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah, and suddenly a chuckle turns into this deeply ingrained belief.
Exactly.
That can be so hard to shake.
Hard to shake.
So how do we even begin to like unpack this? So the author responded to some of these comments, emphasizing how important honesty and personal growth are in relationships.
Okay.
He even suggested that constantly needing that ego stroking could signal like deeper issues, like a lack of self-awareness or even just like maturity.
His response makes you think, though, right. Like, are we too quick to just brush things off as just a joke when they might be revealing something deeper about a person or even society? It's almost like humor becomes a shield that prevents us from having those tough but necessary conversations about those problematic behaviors and mindsets.
It's like those jokes about certain groups always being late or bad drivers or obsessed with certain things. Like sometimes those jokes are harmless.
Sure.
But when they're constantly reinforced, it's easy to see how they warp perceptions and fuel these negative biases.
Exactly. And if we just dismiss these things as just a joke, we miss the chance to examine the underlying stereotypes.
Yeah.
That might be fueling those jokes in the first place.
That's a good point. But let's kind of shift gears for a second. The article also explores how humor can be used as like a weapon.
Oh, right. The dark side of online humor, where it escalates from playful banter to basically a verbal assault.
Right. And it can happen so fast.
So fast.
The author shares a personal example of this too. So after he shared his perspective on honesty in relationships, someone hits him with this gem. So you're a virgin then. That's cool.
Ouch. Classic ad hominem attack. Designed to discredit the person, not the ideas.
Right. But here's the interesting part. Instead of firing back or getting defensive, he uses it as like a teaching moment.
Okay.
He turns the insult into this opportunity to explain deflection tactics and the fragility of egos that use this attack.
Wow. That's brilliant. It's like he disarmed the attacker by highlighting the flawed logic. You know, instead of feeding the negativity, he elevated the conversation and exposed the tactic for what it was.
Right. It was this desperate attempt to avoid the real issue.
Exactly.
And he even uses humor to kind of diffuse the situation.
Nice.
Acknowledging that virgin comment with some sarcasm. But the core message was clear. Resorting to personal attacks is often a sign of insecurity and an inability to just have a mature, respectful debate.
It makes you wonder why some people are so invested in winning online. You know? Even if it means resorting to insults and just being mean.
Right. What's the payoff for them?
Well, the article talks about some interesting psychology concepts like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, that pyramid that shows our basic human needs.
Vaguely. Remind me.
Okay. So it starts with basic needs like food and shelter. Then it moves up to things like safety, belonging, and esteem.
Okay.
The author suggests that people who are stuck at that esteem level are constantly craving validation and recognition.
Oh, I see.
Which can lead to some pretty unhealthy behaviors online.
So they're trying to boost their own ego by putting others down.
Kinda, yeah. They haven't developed a strong sense of self-worth, so they seek validation externally, even if it's from these negative interactions.
Wow.
The author calls them self-centered vampires.
Self-centered vampires.
Yeah, feeding off the attention, regardless of whether it's positive or negative.
Okay, self-centered vampires. That image is definitely going to stick with me.
Right.
It perfectly captures that energy-sucking dynamic we've all seen online. But seriously, why do they do this?
Well, think about how social media is structured. It's designed to reward engagement. Even if that engagement comes from conflict and negativity, every comment, every share, it feeds the algorithm,
Yeah.
which in turn feeds that person's need for attention.
So it's like this vicious cycle. The more outrageous or provocative they are, the more attention they get, which just reinforces the behavior.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that we as individuals have the power to break that cycle.
So we can choose not to engage.
We can choose not to feed the vampires.
I like that. That's a good reminder for all of us. We have a choice in how we respond to these situations.
Absolutely. And that leads us to the next critical question. Do we engage with these people or do we walk away?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And thankfully, the article gives us some guidance on making that decision.
Good.
So how do we navigate this tricky terrain?
The author outlines two main approaches. The teaching approach, where you try to elevate the conversation and maybe even educate the person. And the walk-away approach, where you disengage and protect your own peace of mind.
Yeah.
Both approaches have their merits. But the key is knowing when to use each one effectively.
So it's about assessing the situation and deciding which approach will be most beneficial
Right.
for ourselves and for like the overall tone of the conversation.
Exactly.
That makes sense. Let's delve into these approaches a little deeper.
Okay, let's start with the teaching approach. Now, it's important to be realistic here.
Okay.
You're not always going to change someone's mind, especially online.
Right.
But you can use these interactions as opportunities to clarify misconceptions, point out logical fallacies, and demonstrate a more constructive way to debate.
So even if we're not converting the person we're responding to, we might be influencing others who are silently watching.
You got it. It's about modeling respectful disagreement
Yeah.
and showing that it's possible to have different viewpoints without resorting to personal attacks or inflammatory rhetoric, like a public service announcement on how to have a healthy debate.
I love that. Instead of just getting sucked into the negativity, we can use these moments to educate and elevate the conversation for everyone.
Exactly. And humor can be a powerful tool in this approach too.
Yeah.
A well-placed joke or a bit of wit can disarm the situation
Right.
without giving them that negative reaction they might be looking for.
It's like saying, hey, I see what you're doing, but I'm not going to let you drag me down to that level.
Right.
We can disagree without resorting to mudslinging.
That's the spirit. But what are some signs that it might be time to switch gears and employ the walk-away approach?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. When do we know it's just not worth the effort to engage?
There are definitely some red flags to watch out for. First, consider whether this person thrives on conflict. You know the type. They get energy from the back and forth, the drama, the negativity.
Yeah, like arguing with a brick wall. They're not interested in listening or learning or finding common ground. They just want to stir the pot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in those cases, setting boundaries is essential. And it's important to do it without guilt. Remember, walking away doesn't mean you're conceding defeat. It means you're prioritizing your own mental and emotional well-being.
So it's about recognizing when a conversation is toxic and choosing to disengage for our own sanity.
Exactly. It's about understanding that you don't have to participate in every argument, especially when it's clear that the other person isn't interested in a genuine exchange of ideas.
That makes a lot of sense. Sometimes the most powerful response is to just say, this isn't a conversation I want to be part of.
Exactly. And you can do that without being rude or dismissive.
Okay.
You can simply state your position, acknowledge their right to a different perspective, and then disengage. It's about taking control of the situation and choosing to focus your energy on more positive and productive interactions.
It's a great reminder that we always have a choice in how we respond. We don't have to let others dictate our emotional state or drag us into their negativity.
You got it. And speaking of negativity, let's talk about one of the most challenging parts of these online conflicts. That feeling that it's somehow personal, that the attacks are directed at us, not just our ideas.
Ugh, yeah. This is something I struggle with too. It's easy to feel like those insults and accusations are a reflection of our worth. Like they're chipping away at our self-esteem with every snarky comment.
I totally get it.
Yeah.
But here's the thing to remember. Even when they make it seem like it's all about you, it rarely is.
Wait, really?
Absolutely. When someone lashes out online or even offline, it's almost always a projection of their own internal struggles, their insecurities, their unresolved issues. They're essentially using you as a mirror
Oh, wow.
to reflect back their own negativity.
So their attacks are more about their discomfort than any real flaw in us.
Exactly. It's called projection. and it's a common defense mechanism. Instead of dealing with their own stuff, they try to shift the blame, make it seem like you're the problem.
So they're trying to deflect responsibility by turning the tables.
Exactly. And that's why it's crucial to remember this. You are not responsible for how others interpret your intentions.
Right.
Especially when you know you've approached the situation with honesty and integrity.
That's such a powerful reminder. It's about staying grounded in our own values and not letting their misinterpretations define us or our worth.
You got it.
But honestly, how do we do that? How do we avoid taking those attacks to heart and letting them chip away at our self-esteem?
One of the most effective tools is something called reframing. Instead of internalizing those accusations and taking them personally, try to view them as a reflection of the other person's discomfort. Remember, it's not about you. It's about their inability to engage maturely and constructively.
So instead of getting caught up in the "what's wrong with me" spiral, we can shift the focus to what's going on with them that's making them act this way.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective can be so freeing. It allows you to detach from the need for their validation and recognize that their behavior is a symptom of their own issues, not a reflection of your worth.
That's so helpful. It's like taking back control of the narrative and choosing not to let their negativity define the whole interaction.
Precisely. And this ability to detach from needing that external validation, that's essential, not just for online conflicts, but for life in general.
Wow.
It allows you to stay true to yourself, your values, and your goals, no matter what others might say or think.
That's such an important point. We need to cultivate that inner strength and sense of self-worth. So we're not constantly looking for approval from outside sources.
Absolutely.
Especially those who might not have our best interests at heart.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This has been incredibly insightful.
Good.
It's amazing how these seemingly simple online interactions can reveal so much about human psychology and the complexities of communication.
It is fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what we've discussed today,
Yeah.
these strategies for knowing when to teach, when to walk away, and how to protect our inner peace, these aren't just for dealing with online trolls. They're valuable tools for navigating any type of conflict,
Right.
whether it's at work with our families or even in our closest relationships.
You're absolutely right. These are life skills, not just internet skills. So before we dive into part 2, let's take a moment to apply these insights to a real-world scenario.
Okay, I like it.
Imagine you're dealing with a difficult coworker who constantly undermines your ideas in meetings. How could you use these strategies to navigate that?
That's a great example. Instead of getting caught up in the emotional frustration,
Right.
you could use these strategies to either engage constructively,
Yeah.
call out their behavior in a calm and logical way,
Yeah?
or simply choose to disengage.
Right.
Focus on your own goals and contributions without letting their negativity derail you.
I love that. It's about choosing our battles wisely and recognizing that sometimes the most powerful response is to just rise above the drama.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we can apply those same strategies to family dynamics too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We all have that relative who always seems to push our button.
Oh, absolutely. Especially around the holidays.
Right. Well, instead of taking it personally or getting sucked into an argument,
Yep.
you can remind yourself that their behavior likely stems from their own unresolved issues,
Okay.
their insecurities, their own struggles. It's not about you, it's about them.
So it's about having compassion for where they're coming from without letting their negativity affect our own well-being.
Exactly.
That's a powerful way to reframe those interactions.
It is. And sometimes that might mean setting boundaries, lovingly but firmly,
Okay.
to protect your own emotional space.
Yeah.
It's about prioritizing our own mental and emotional health
Right.
without getting caught up in their drama.
That makes sense. It's about recognizing that we have a right to protect our own energy and to choose who we spend our time with and how we engage with them.
Precisely. And all of this leads us to one of the most powerful insights from this article. It's not about you. When someone lashes out,
Right.
whether online or in person, it's almost always a projection of their own internal turmoil.
This is such a great point. It's so easy to internalize those attacks and let them affect our sense of self-worth.
Absolutely. But here's the key. When someone lashes out online or offline, it's almost always a projection of their own inner turmoil.
Okay.
Their insecurities, their unresolved issues. They are using you as a mirror to reflect back their negativity.
So their negativity is more about them than it is about us.
Exactly. And this is where the concept of reframing becomes so powerful. Instead of taking their accusations personally, try to see them as a reflection of their own discomfort It's not about you. It's about their inability to engage in a mature and constructive way.
So instead of asking ourselves, what's wrong with me?
Right.
You can ask, what's going on with them that's causing them to act this way?
Exactly. And that shift in perspective can be incredibly liberating. It allows you to detach from the need for their validation and to recognize that their behavior is a symptom of their own issues, not a reflection of your worth.
That's such a powerful concept. It really takes the sting out of those personal attacks when you realize they're not really about you at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this ability to detach from the need for external validation is essential not just for navigating conflict, but for life in general.
Wow.
It allows you to stay true to yourself, your values, and your goals, regardless of what others might say or think.
That's such an important point. We need to cultivate that inner strength and sense of self-worth. So we're not constantly seeking approval from outside sources,
You got it.
especially those who might not have our best interests at heart.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that true validation comes from within, from aligning our actions with our values, and from pursuing a life that feels authentic and meaningful to us.
This has been incredibly insightful. It's amazing how seemingly simple online interactions can reveal so much about human psychology and the complexities of communication.
It is fascinating, isn't it? And what we've discussed today, these strategies for knowing when to teach, when to walk away, and how to protect our inner peace. These aren't just for dealing with online trolls. They're valuable tools for navigating any type of conflict,
Right.
whether it's in the workplace, our families, or even our closest relationships.
You're absolutely right. These are life skills, not just internet skills. So before we move on to part 2 of this deep dive, let's quickly recap what we've covered so far. We talked about how quickly humor can be weaponized, how to recognize those moments when a joke crosses the line, and how to differentiate between playful banter and personal attacks.
We also explored the concept of self-centered vampires,
Right.
those individuals who thrive on conflict and attention, and how we can choose to either engage constructively or disengage completely, depending on the situation.
And perhaps most importantly, we discussed the power of reframing,
Yes.
of recognizing that other people's negativity is often a projection of their own internal struggles and not a reflection of our worth.
Exactly. And as we move into part 2, we'll explore those two approaches, the teaching approach and the walk-away approach in more detail, giving you practical tips and strategies for handling these situations with grace and confidence. Welcome back to our deep dive into navigating those tricky situations when jokes turn toxic. We've laid the groundwork, understanding the psychology behind these online conflicts, and now it's time to get practical.
Exactly. It's one thing to grasp these concepts theoretically, but applying them in the heat of the moment, when emotions are running high, that's a whole other ballgame.
Absolutely. So let's say you're scrolling through your feed and you come across a post that sparks this heated discussion.
Okay.
You try to lighten the mood with a humorous comment,
Oh.
and suddenly someone throws a jab at you. Maybe a snide remark disguised as a joke.
I know that feeling. Your heart starts racing and your fingers are inching to fire back a witty retort, but you know that probably won't end well.
That's your fight or flight response kicking in. But before you hit that send button, take a deep breath and ask yourself this crucial question: is this person teachable?
That's a great point. If they're just looking for a reaction to fuel the flames of the argument, then any response we give is only going to make things worse. We need to pick our battles carefully.
Precisely. But let's say you genuinely believe there's a chance for a productive conversation. That maybe this person is simply misinformed or coming from a place of misunderstanding.
Okay, so how do we approach that conversation in a way that's both effective and respectful?
Well, the first step is to de-escalate the situation. Remember, humor can be a powerful tool. Even in these tense moments, a well-placed joke or a self-deprecating remark can create a more open space for dialogue.
So instead of getting defensive or matching their snarkiness, we can try to inject a bit of lightness, maybe poke fun at ourselves a little. It's kind of like saying, hey, we're all human here. Let's not take ourselves too seriously.
Exactly. It shows that you're not taking the bait and that you're willing to engage on a more mature level. Plus, it can be incredibly disarming, throwing them off guard and shifting the energy of the interaction.
I love that. It's like you're saying, I see your attempt to provoke me, but I'm not playing that game. It takes the wind out of their sails.
Yeah, precisely. And once you've created a more relaxed atmosphere, you can start addressing the actual content of their argument, but always with respect and a genuine desire to understand their perspective.
This reminds me of something we discussed earlier. That idea of active listening. It's not just about waiting for our turn to speak, but truly hearing what the other person is saying, even if we completely disagree.
You're exactly right. Active listening is crucial, And it can be really challenging, especially online where it's easy to get distracted or to just focus on formulating our next response.
Do you have any tips for practicing active listening in these online environments?
Absolutely. One technique I find helpful is to try to rephrase what they've said in your own words, just to make sure you're understanding their point of view.
So it's like saying, okay, what I'm hearing you say is, and then reflecting back their perspective to ensure you're both on the same page.
Exactly. It not only clarifies their position, but also shows that you're genuinely trying to engage with their ideas, which can often diffuse some of the tension and create a more respectful dialogue.
I love that. It's like saying, I see you, I hear you, and I respect your right to have a different opinion, even if I don't agree with it.
Exactly. And that's such a powerful foundation for any meaningful conversation.
But what if, despite our best efforts to de-escalate and engage in active listening, the other person just keeps doubling down on the attacks, resorting to personal insults, or twisting our words?
That's a great question. And it brings us to the walk-away approach. Remember, we don't have to engage in every battle, especially when it's clear that the other person isn't interested in a genuine exchange of ideas. It's about recognizing when a conversation has become toxic and choosing to protect our own energy and well-being.
So it's like that saying, you can't reason with unreasonable people.
Exactly. Sometimes the most powerful response is to simply disengage. You can say something like, I think we're just going to have to agree to disagree, or I respect your right to your opinion, but I'm not going to engage in this conversation any further. It's a way of setting boundary and saying, this isn't healthy, and I'm choosing not to participate.
And that's such an important skill to develop, not just online, but in all areas of our lives.
Absolutely. It takes practice and courage. But it's about recognizing that our time and energy are precious, and that we have the right to choose how we spend them.
This all makes so much sense in the context of online interactions. But how do these strategies translate to offline conflicts, those face-to-face encounters with difficult people? Let's say you're dealing with a coworker who constantly interrupts you in meetings or tries to take credit for your ideas.
That's a great question. And it's important to remember that these principles apply equally in the real world. When it comes to those tricky workplace dynamics, clarity and assertiveness are key. If someone is consistently interrupting you, you can address it directly but calmly.
So something like, I noticed you tend to interrupt me when I'm speaking. I'd appreciate it if you'd let me finish my thoughts.
Exactly. And if the behavior continues, you can set a firmer boundary. You might say, I'm not comfortable continuing this conversation if I'm not being given the space to speak freely.
It's about advocating for yourself and making it clear that their behavior is unacceptable.
Precisely. And sometimes setting boundaries might involve physically removing yourself from the situation. If a conversation is becoming heated, you can excuse yourself and say, I need a break from this conversation right now.
It's about prioritizing your own well-being and recognizing that you don't have to subject yourself to negativity or abuse, whether it's verbal or emotional.
Exactly. And these strategies apply to those tricky family dynamics too. We all have that relative who seems to push our buttons or make those insensitive comments, especially around the holidays.
Oh, don't remind me. It seems like those family gatherings always bring out the best and the worst in people.
That's true. In those situations, remember, you don't have to engage in every argument or try to change their minds. You can acknowledge their comment without agreeing with it.
So something like, I understand you see things differently, and I respect your opinion, but I'm not going to get into a debate about this right now.
Exactly. It's about choosing your battles wisely and recognizing that some conversations are simply not worth the energy or the emotional toll.
It's also about recognizing that we can't control other people's behavior, only our own reactions to it.
You got it.
Yeah.
And remember, setting boundaries doesn't make you a bad person or a bad family member. It's about taking care of your own emotional well-being and creating a more peaceful and harmonious environment for everyone.
I love that. It's about recognizing that we have a right to protect our own energy and to choose who we spend our time with and how we engage with them.
Precisely. And this brings us back to one of the most important aspects of navigating conflict, remembering that it's not about you. It's so easy to internalize those attacks and let them affect our sense of self-worth.
This is something I personally struggle with. When someone throws out an insult or a snide remark, it's hard not to take it personally.
I understand. But remember, when someone lashes out, whether it's a stranger online or a loved one in person, it's almost always a projection of their own internal turmoil, their insecurities, their unresolved issues. It has very little to do with you as a person.
So their negativity is more about them than it is about us.
Exactly. And this is where the concept of reframing becomes so powerful. Instead of taking their accusations personally, Try to see them as a reflection of their own discomfort. It's not about you. It's about their inability to engage in a mature and constructive way.
That's a great point. So instead of getting caught up in that "what's wrong with me" spiral, we can shift the focus and ask ourselves what's going on with them that's causing them to act this way.
Yes. And that shift in perspective can be incredibly liberating. It allows you to detach from the need for their validation and recognize that their behavior is a symptom of their own issues, not a reflection of your worth.
That's such a powerful concept. It really takes the sting out of those personal attacks when you realize they're not really about you at all.
Exactly. And this ability to detach from the need for external validation is essential not just for navigating conflict, but for life in general. It allows you to stay true to yourself, your values, and your goals, regardless of what others might say or think.
That's such an important point. We need to cultivate that inner strength and sense of self-worth, so we're not constantly seeking approval from outside sources, especially those who might not have our best interests at heart.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that true validation comes from within, from aligning our actions with our values, and from pursuing a life that feels authentic and meaningful to us.
I think we've covered a lot of ground here today. It's amazing how these seemingly simple interactions, whether online or offline, can reveal so much about human psychology and the complexities of communication.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And what we've discussed today, those strategies for knowing when to teach, when to walk away, and how to protect our inner peace. These aren't just for dealing with online trolls or difficult coworkers. They're valuable tools for navigating any type of conflict, even within our families and closest relationships.
You're absolutely right. These are life skills, not just internet skills.
Exactly. Before we move on to part 3, where we'll delve deeper into this idea of detaching from the need for external validation, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've covered in this segment. We've explored the teaching approach and the walkaway approach, two valuable strategies for handling those moments when jokes turn toxic. We've talked about the importance of active listening, de-escalation, setting boundaries, and the incredible power of reframing.
We've also emphasized the importance of recognizing that other people's negativity is often a projection of their own internal struggles, and that we have the power to choose how we respond, rather than letting their behavior dictate our emotional state.
Yes. Remember, you are not responsible for how others interpret your intentions, especially when you know you've approached the situation with honesty and integrity.
These are powerful reminders for us all.
Absolutely. So as we move into the final part of this deep dive, think about how you can apply these strategies in your own life. How can you engage more constructively, set healthy boundaries, and ultimately protect your own peace of mind? Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll unpack even more practical tips and insights.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into those times when jokes turn toxic. We've explored the psychology behind these online clashes, we've learned to spot those red flags, and practice some seriously effective strategies for handling those heated moments. But you know what?
What's that?
There's this one key concept that I think kind of ties everything together.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It's the idea of detaching from the need for external validation.
Oh, that's a good one. It's so easy to fall into that trap of seeking approval from others, especially in this age of social media.
Right.
We're constantly bombarded with likes and comments and opinions. It's like everyone's got something to say.
It's true. And it's important to understand why that constant need for validation can be so harmful to our well-being when we tie our sense of worth to what other people think. It's like we're giving them the power to control our emotions.
Like handing over the reins to our happiness.
Exactly. But how do we break free from that? How do we develop that inner strength and self-assurance so we can navigate these challenges without letting those external voices dictate our worth?
It's a journey, for sure. It starts with becoming aware of those negative self-talk patterns.
Okay.
You know, those inner voices that whisper doubts and insularity.
We all have those.
We all do. It's about recognizing them for what they are. Just thoughts, not facts.
So it's like we become detectives of our own minds, paying attention to those thought patterns and noticing when they spiral into negativity.
You got it. And once we identify those negative patterns, we can start to challenge them. Ask ourselves, is this thought really true? What evidence do I have to support this? Is there another way to look at this situation?
So instead of just accepting those negative thoughts as truth, we question them, examine them,
Exactly.
and see if they actually hold up.
And as we challenge those negative thoughts, we can start replacing them with more positive and empowering beliefs. Focus on our strengths.
Yeah.
Celebrate our accomplishments. Remind ourselves of all the things we're grateful for.
It's like becoming our own cheerleader.
Exactly. And this isn't about being arrogant or denying our flaws. It's about recognizing that our worth isn't determined by external factors, like likes, followers, other people's opinions. It's about cultivating self-love and acceptance, knowing that we are inherently valuable, just as we are.
I love that. It's like shifting the focus from seeking external validation
Yeah,
to cultivating internal validation.
precisely. And when we make that shift, we become less susceptible to those external attacks, those attempts to diminish our value or undermine our confidence. We develop resilience that helps us navigate those challenges with grace and composure.
It's like building an inner shield that deflects negativity and allows us to move through the world with confidence and inner peace.
That's a great way to put it. And remember, this process takes time and practice. It's not about achieving perfect self-love. It's about continually showing up for ourselves,
Right.
challenging those negative thoughts,
Right.
and celebrating our strengths.
So it's an ongoing journey of self-discovery and self-acceptance.
It is. And as we cultivate that deeper sense of self-worth, we find that we're less reactive to those external triggers, less likely to get caught up in the drama and negativity. We can approach those challenging situations with more clarity, more compassion, and a deeper understanding that it's not about winning or losing. It's about staying true to ourselves and our values.
This has been so insightful. I feel like I've gained some valuable tools, not just for navigating those murky waters of online interactions, but for approaching life's challenges with more grace and resilience.
I'm glad to hear that. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this final thought. You are worthy, just as you are.
Yeah.
You don't need anyone's permission to believe in yourself, to pursue your dreams, or to live a life that feels authentic and fulfilling.
That's such a powerful message. It's a reminder that true validation comes from within, and that we have the power to choose how we respond to the world around us.
Absolutely. So remember, when faced with those moments when jokes turn toxic, take a deep breath, assess the situation, and choose a response that aligns with your values and protects your well-being. You have the power to create a more positive and fulfilling online experience, and ultimately a more fulfilling life.
This deep dive has given us all so much to think about, and I hope our listeners feel empowered to navigate those challenging online interactions with more confidence and grace.
Remember, your response is always more powerful than the conflict itself. Choose to respond with integrity, compassion, and a deep knowing of your own inherent worth.
That's a wrap on this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey of self-discovery and learning. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep shining bright.